They were standing in the cargo bay of their ship, the Defiant. It was an old vessel, patched together with spare parts and stubbornness, but it had never let them down. David had spent years keeping it flying, treating the ship like it was his own child. James repeated himself. "I want to break into Blackspire Station and rescue a princess." David set down his wrench and wiped his hands on his pants. He was a small man with quick eyes and quicker hands. He could fix anything mechanical, and he could spot a bad idea from a mile away. Right now, he was definitely spotting a bad idea. "Blackspire Station," David said slowly. "The most secure prison in the entire galaxy. The one that orbits a dying star. The one with 3 warships and 10,000 soldiers." "That Blackspire Station?" "That is the one." David was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. It started small and grew until he had to lean against the wall for support. "Oh, that is wonderful," he said, gasping for breath. "For a second there, I thought you were serious." "I am serious." David stopped laughing. He looked at James's face and saw something there that made his smile fade away. He had known James for 10 years. He had seen him fight through impossible situations without showing fear, but he had never seen him look quite like this before. "The Queen found you," David said. It was not a question. "Her daughter is 8 years old, David. She has been locked up in that place for 3 years. They are running experiments on her." David closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He knew what James was thinking. He knew about the nightmares that still woke his friend up in the middle of the night. He knew about the guilt that James carried everywhere he went. "We cannot do this alone," David said finally. James felt hope rise in his chest. "Does that mean you are in?" "I am always in, you idiot. Someone has to keep you alive." David picked up his wrench and pointed it at James. "But we need help. Real help. People who know what they are doing." James nodded. "I have some ideas." Over the next 2 weeks, they traveled across the sector, calling in old favors and making new promises. Their first stop was a space station on the edge of hegemony territory, where they found Grace Lee hiding in a tiny apartment above a noodle shop. Grace had once been one of the hegemony's best intelligence officers. She had access to secrets that most people did not even know existed. But 2 years ago, she had discovered something terrible. The hegemony was not just holding prisoners. They were experimenting on them, trying to unlock genetic secrets that could give them power over ancient alien technology scattered across the galaxy. Grace had stolen as much information as she could and run. She had been hiding ever since, waiting for the right moment to strike back. When James told her about the mission, she did not hesitate for even a second. "I have the full blueprints of Blackspire Station in my head," she said. "I memorized them before I left. Every corridor, every security system, every blind spot. I've been waiting 3 years for someone crazy enough to use this information." "Well," James said, "here we are." Grace smiled. It was a dangerous smile. "Let us go save a princess." Their next recruit was Kevin, a demolitions expert who James had served with in the Marines. Kevin was a big man with gentle eyes and hands that could build bombs out of almost anything. He had retired after the war, but he was bored with civilian life. When James called, Kevin was already packing his bags. Then came Daniel, a hacker who lived on a ship that never stopped moving. Daniel could talk to computers like they were old friends. He could break into systems that were supposed to be unbreakable. He was also slightly crazy, but James figured that was a requirement for this mission. Finally, they found Emma and Lily, twin sisters who flew strike fighters like they were born in cockpits. They had been mercenaries for years, taking jobs that no one else would touch. They did not care about money or politics. They cared about the challenge. And breaking into Blackspire Station was the biggest challenge they had ever heard of. The team gathered on the Defiant for their first meeting. They sat around the table in the cargo bay while Grace projected a holographic image of Black Spire Station. It looked like a nightmare made of metal. The station was shaped like a black tower, spinning slowly in the glow of a dying red star. Ships moved around it like insects, and the radiation readings made everyone's skin crawl just from looking at them. "The radiation belt is our first problem," Grace said. "Standard ship shields will fail within 3 minutes of entering the zone. Anyone inside will be dead within 5. "I can modify our shields," David said. "There is a technique using layered magnetic fields that might work." The hegemony thinks it is impossible, but they have never seen what a determined human engineer can do. Grace nodded and continued. "Once we get past the radiation, we need to avoid the patrol ships. Emma and Lily will create a distraction while the Defiant slips in through a maintenance entrance on the station's lower level. From there, we split into 2 teams. Kevin and Daniel will head to the power core and cause as much chaos as possible. James, David, and I will move to the detention level. Where is the princess being held?" James asked. Grace's face grew dark. "She is in a medical lab on level 7. They are keeping her connected to machines that monitor her genetic makeup. The hegemony believes that her bloodline can unlock ancient technology. If they succeed in cracking the code, they will have power beyond anything we can imagine." The room was silent. Everyone understood what was at stake now. This was not just about saving one little girl. This was about stopping the hegemony from becoming unstoppable. "We run the simulations tonight," James said. "We leave in 3 days. David raised his hand. "I ran some simulations already. Every single one ended with us dying horribly." "Then stop running simulations," James replied. "We are humans. We do not do well with statistics and probability. We do better when we just jump in and figure it out as we go." Kevin laughed. "That is the worst plan I have ever heard." "It is not a plan," James said. "It is a philosophy." Emma and Lily exchanged looks and grinned. Daniel cracked his knuckles. Grace nodded slowly. They spent the next 72 hours preparing. David worked on the shields without sleep, pushing the Defiant systems beyond their design limits. Kevin built explosives from spare parts. Daniel practiced breaking into hegemony security networks. Emma and Lily ran combat drills until their fingers ached, and James sat alone in the cockpit, staring at the stars, thinking about a little girl trapped in the dark. "I am coming," he whispered. "Just hold on a little longer." The Defiant's engines roared to life. The mission had begun. The Defiant dropped out of hyperspace in the shadow of a dead moon. The crew sat in tense silence as the ship drifted forward on minimal power, hiding from the sensors that swept the area like hungry eyes. Ahead of them, Black Spire Station waited. James had seen many terrible things in his life, but the station made his stomach turn. It was a massive tower of black metal, spinning slowly against the red glow of the dying star behind it. Lights flickered along its surface like the eyes of some sleeping monster. 3 hegemony warships circled it like guard dogs, their weapons always ready, always watching. "Radiation levels are already climbing," David reported from his console. "We have maybe 6 minutes before the shields start to fail." "Then we better move fast," James said. He looked at Emma and Lily through the communication screen. They were already in their fighters, attached to the underside of the Defiant. "You two ready?" "Born ready," Emma replied. "Ready to make some noise?" Lily added with a grin. James nodded. "Go out in 30 seconds. Draw those patrol ships away from the station's lower hull. Give us a window to slip in." "Copy that." "See you on the other side, Captain." The twin fighters detached from the Defiant and shot forward into the darkness. James watched them go, Two tiny sparks of light against the vast emptiness of space. 20 seconds passed. Then 30. And then the night exploded. Emma and Lily came in fast and hard, their weapons blazing. They hit the nearest patrol ship before it even knew they were there, tearing holes in its hull and sending it spinning off course. Alarms began to scream across every hegemony channel. The two remaining patrol ships turned to chase the fighters, their massive guns trying to track the tiny dancing targets. "Window is open," David said. "Let us go." James pushed the Defiant forward at full speed. The ship shook as it entered the radiation belt, and warning lights began to flash across every console. The temperature climbed. The shields groaned under the pressure. "Shields at 80%, David called out. 70, 65. "Just a little more," James said through gritted teeth. The station grew larger and larger in the view screen. James could see the maintenance entrance now, a small opening in the lower hull that Grace had identified from her stolen blueprints. It was barely big enough for their ship, but it would have to do. Shields at 40%, 35, almost there. The Defiant slid into the shadow of the station, and suddenly the radiation dropped. David's modifications had held just long enough. The ship was smoking and sparking in a dozen places, but it was still flying. "We are in," James announced. "Kevin, Daniel, you are up first." The maintenance entrance opened with a hiss as Daniel worked his magic on the security systems. The team moved quickly, their weapons ready, their hearts pounding. Kevin and Daniel went left, heading for the power core. James, David, and Grace went right, following the path that Grace had burned into her memory. The corridors of Black Spire Station were cold and dark. The walls were made of black metal that seemed to swallow light. James felt like he was walking through the belly of some great beast. They moved in silence, avoiding cameras and patrols with Grace's guidance. But James knew their luck would not last forever. Somewhere in this station, someone would notice that things were not right. They had just reached level 5 when the alarms began to wail. "They found us," Grace said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were hard. "The detention level is 2 floors up. We need to move now." They started running. Hegemony soldiers appeared at the end of the corridor, their weapons raised. James did not slow down. He fired as he ran, his shots precise and deadly. The Marines had trained him well, and he had never forgotten those lessons. David covered their flank, his own weapon barking in the narrow corridor. He was not a soldier like James, but he had learned how to fight during their years together. He knew how to survive. Grace guided them through a maze of hallways and stairwells, always one step ahead of the soldiers chasing them. She knew this station like she knew her own heartbeat. Every turn, every door, every hiding spot was already mapped in her mind. They burst through a door and found themselves face to face with a squad of hegemony elite guards. These were not regular soldiers. They wore heavy armor and carried weapons that could cut through steel. James did not hesitate. He threw himself at the nearest guard, tackling him to the ground before the man could fire. They struggled for a moment, and then James's knife found a gap in the armor. The guard went still. David and Grace took down 2 more guards while James fought. The remaining soldiers fell back, calling for reinforcements. "The power core," Grace said, checking her communicator. "Kevin just sent the signal. He's ready to blow it." "Tell him to wait," James replied. "We need to get to the princess first." They ran again, their lungs burning, their legs aching. The detention level was just ahead. James could feel it calling to him, pulling him forward through the chaos. And then they were there. The medical lab was sealed behind a heavy blast door. Daniel's voice crackled through the communicator. "I am in the system. Unlocking now." The door slid open, and James stepped inside. The room was full of machines and monitors, all of them connected to a small bed in the center. And on that bed, looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes. It was a little girl with dark hair and pale skin, Princess Hannah. She was smaller than James had expected, thin and fragile after 3 years of captivity. Wires and tubes ran from her arms to the machines around her, and her hands were shaking. James holstered his weapon and walked toward her slowly, his hands open and empty. "It is okay," he said softly. "My name is James. Your mother sent me to bring you home." The girl stared at him. She did not speak. She did not move. But something changed in her eyes, a tiny spark of hope that had almost been extinguished. "Are you really here to save me?" she whispered. James knelt beside her bed and began carefully removing the wires. "I am really here, and I am not leaving without you." David appeared at the door. "James, we have a problem. A big one." James looked up. "What kind of problem?" "Admiral Stone is on his way here personally. He has locked down the entire station. There is no way out." Grace was already working on her communicator. Emma and Lily are pinned down. Kevin and Daniel are trapped near the power core. "We are on our own." James looked down at Hannah. She was watching him with those big, trusting eyes, waiting to see what he would do. He had promised to bring her home. He had promised her mother that he would succeed. "Then we make a new way out," James said. He picked up the princess and held her close. "David, get Kevin on the line. Tell him to blow the power core early. We are going to need the distraction." David nodded. "And then what?" James smiled grimly. "Then we do what humans do best. We survive." The station shook as Kevin's explosives detonated somewhere below. The lights flickered and died, plunging everything into emergency red lighting. James Park started running, a little girl in his arms and an Empire chasing behind him. The real fight was about to begin. The emergency lights painted everything in shades of red as James ran through the corridors of Blackspire Station. Princess Hannah clung to his neck, her small body trembling against his chest. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder with every passing second. "Turn left at the next junction," Grace shouted from behind him. She was running alongside David, her weapon ready, her eyes scanning every shadow. "There is a secondary maintenance shaft that leads to the lower docking bay." James turned left and nearly crashed into a wall of hegemony soldiers. There were at least 20 of them, all armored, all armed, all blocking the only path to freedom. At their head stood a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes that had seen 1,000 battles. Admiral Stone. "James Park," the Admiral said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "The human who thinks he can challenge an empire. I have heard stories about your kind. They say you do not know when to quit." James stopped running. He gently set Hannah down behind him, shielding her with his body. David and Grace moved to flank him, their weapons raised. "We are leaving," James said. "You can step aside or you can try to stop us." Admiral Stone smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "You killed 27 of my soldiers getting here. You damaged 3 of my ships. You destroyed half my power grid. All for one little girl. She is not just a little girl. She is a child who deserves to go home. She is property of the galactic hegemony. Her blood contains secrets that will make us the most powerful force in the universe." The Admiral's smile faded. "You are not leaving the station alive." James did not blink. "Then I guess we are going to have a problem." The corridor exploded into violence. Grace moved first, throwing something small and round at the soldiers. It exploded in a flash of blinding light and deafening sound. James was already moving, his weapon firing, his body carrying him forward through the chaos. David grabbed Hannah and pulled her toward a side passage. "Come on, little one. We need to go now." But Hannah was frozen, her eyes wide with terror. She had spent 3 years in this place, surrounded by people who hurt her and scared her. She could not move. Hannah. David knelt in front of her, blocking her view of the battle. Look at me. Just look at me. I know you are scared. I am scared too. But I need you to be brave for just a little longer. Can you do that? The little girl looked into David's eyes. She saw kindness there, and warmth, and something that reminded her of her mother. Slowly she nodded. Good girl. David picked her up and started running. Behind them, James and Grace were fighting for their lives. James had been a Marine once, and the training never really left him. He moved through the soldiers like a ghost, striking and dodging and firing with deadly precision. But there were too many of them, and they were too well trained. A shot grazed his arm. Another hit his leg. He stumbled, but kept fighting. Grace was beside him, her own movements fast and efficient. She had been trained by the hegemony themselves, and she knew all their tactics. But she also knew that they could not win this fight. James, she said between shots, you need to go. Take the girl and run. I am not leaving you. Yes, you are. Grace grabbed his arm and looked into his eyes. I did not join this mission to escape. I joined because I needed to make things right. I helped build this empire's systems. I know all their secrets. And I know how to hurt them. James shook his head. There has to be another way. There is not. Grace smiled, and for a moment she looked almost peaceful. I have been carrying something since the day I defected. A gift for Admiral Stone. Get David and the princess to the ship. I will buy you time. Before James could argue, Grace pushed him toward the side passage and turned back to face the soldiers. James ran. Every step felt like a betrayal, but he ran because there was a little girl counting on him. He ran because Grace had sacrificed herself so that he could keep going. He ran because that was what humans did when someone gave them a chance. He caught up with David in the maintenance shaft. Hannah was still in his arms, her face buried against his shoulder. Where is Grace? David asked. James could not answer. He just shook his head. They kept moving. The shaft opened into a small docking bay where a stolen hegemony shuttle was waiting. Kevin and Daniel were already there, covered in burns and scratches but still alive. We hot-wired this thing, Kevin said, gesturing at the shuttle. It will get us back to the Defiant. Then let us go, James said. Now, they piled into the shuttle and launched into the chaos outside. Emma and Lily were still flying, their fighters dancing between the massive warships, drawing fire and buying time. The Defiant is in position, David reported from the pilot's seat. We just need to reach it. James looked out the window at the station behind them. He thought about Grace, alone in that corridor, facing an entire army. And then he saw the explosion. It was massive, a ball of fire that ripped through the entire detention level. The shock wave hit their shuttle and sent it spinning, but David managed to keep control. When they looked back, half of Black Spire Station was in flames. What was that? Kevin whispered. James closed his eyes. That was Grace saying goodbye. They docked with the Defiant just as Emma and Lily arrived in their battered fighters. The ship jumped to hyperspace before the hegemony could react, leaving behind a burning station and a very angry Admiral. In the cargo bay, James sat on a crate and stared at his hands. They were covered in blood. Some of it was his. Most of it was not. Hannah walked over to him slowly. She'd been cleaned up and given new clothes, but her eyes were still haunted. You are hurt, she said softly. I am okay, James lied. The little girl sat down beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lady who stayed behind, Hannah finally said. She was nice to me. When I first came here, she would sneak food to my cell. She would tell me that someone would come to save me someday. James felt tears burning in his eyes. She was very brave. She saved us. Yes, she did. Hannah reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. "Thank you for coming to get me," she whispered. I was starting to think no one would ever come. James squeezed her hand gently. "I made a promise to your mother. I do not break my promises." The Defiant flew through hyperspace towards safety, carrying a little princess and a crew of broken heroes who had done the impossible. But the war was not over yet. And James knew that the hegemony would not forget what had happened today, that they would come looking for revenge. They would hunt them across the galaxy. They would never stop until everyone involved in this mission was dead. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, James just held a little girl's hand and let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he had finally done something right. The Defiant limped through space like a wounded animal. Half its systems were damaged, its shields were nearly gone, and 3 of its engines had stopped working completely. But it was still flying, and that was all that mattered. David had not slept in 3 days. He had spent every waking moment keeping the ship alive, patching holes and rerouting power and talking to the engines like they were old friends who needed encouragement. "Just a little farther," he whispered to the ship. "You can do this. You have carried us through worse." The ship groaned in response, but it kept moving. In the cargo bay, the rest of the crew rested and recovered from their wounds. Kevin had burns on his arms from the explosions he had set. Daniel had a concussion from a piece of falling debris. Emma and Lily were covered in bruises from the G-forces of their insane flying. And James Parks sat alone in the cockpit, staring at the stars and thinking about everyone they had lost. Grace Lee had died so that they could escape. She had sacrificed herself without hesitation, without fear, because she believed that some things were worth dying for. James would carry her memory for the rest of his life. "We are approaching the rendezvous point," David announced through the intercom. "Everyone get ready." The neutral zone appeared on their sensors, a small pocket of space that neither the hegemony nor any other power controlled. It was here that Queen Una had been waiting for 30 days, hoping against hope that someone would bring her daughter home. James walked to the viewport and watched as a small refugee ship came into view. It was old and battered, nothing like the royal vessels that Queen Una must have commanded in her former life. But it was here, and that was what mattered. "This is the Defiant," James said into the communication system. "We have your package." There was silence for a long moment. Then a voice came through, trembling with emotion. "Bring her to me, please. Bring my daughter to me." The 2 ships docked together, and the crew gathered in the airlock. David was carrying Hannah in his arms. The little girl had been quiet for most of the journey, processing everything that had happened. But as the airlock opened, she looked up and saw something that made her whole face light up. "Mama!" Queen Una stood on the other side, tears streaming down her face. She fell to her knees as Hannah ran toward her, and mother and daughter crashed together in an embrace that seemed to contain 3 years of pain and longing. "My baby," Queen Una sobbed, holding Hannah so tightly that it looked like she would never let go. "My precious baby. I am so sorry. I am so sorry I could not come myself. I am so sorry it took so long. It is okay, Mama." Hannah was crying too, but she was also smiling. "They came for me. The humans came for me just like you said they would." James stood back and watched the reunion. He felt something loosen in his chest, some knot of guilt and pain that had been there for so long. He had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. This was why they had done it. This was why Grace had died, why they had risked everything, why they had challenged an empire against impossible odds. For this moment, for a mother holding her child again, Queen Una finally looked up at the crew of the Defiant. Her eyes found James, and she gently released her daughter long enough to walk toward him. "Where is the woman?" she asked. "Grace Lee, the one who knew the station." James could not meet her eyes. "She did not make it. She stayed behind so that we could escape." The queen was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with grief. She will be remembered. I swear it on my throne and my blood. Her name will be spoken with honor for as long as my line endures. She would have liked that, James said quietly. Queen Yuna reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm and warm, full of gratitude that words could not express. The Galactic Hegemony believes they understand humans, she said. They think your species is weak because you lack their ships and their weapons and their numbers. They look at Earth and see a small planet with primitive technology, and they dismiss you as nothing important. She shook her head slowly. They are wrong. They are so terribly wrong. James looked at her, waiting. Your friend walked into the heart of their power. Queen Yuna continued. He faced an entire empire with nothing but a small crew and a broken ship. He fought through their best soldiers, survived their deadliest traps, and brought my daughter home. She squeezed his hand tighter. One human against an empire. And he won. James wanted to say that it did not feel like winning. He wanted to say that they had lost grace and damaged the Defiant and barely escaped with their lives. He wanted to say that the hegemony would come looking for revenge, and that the galaxy was now a more dangerous place for all of them. But he did not say any of those things. Instead, he just nodded. Word of the Black Spire raid spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. At first, it was just rumors. Whispers in cantinas and markets about a group of humans who had broken into the most secure prison in the hegemony. But then the evidence started to appear. Images of the damaged station. Reports of Admiral Stone's failure. Stories from soldiers who had survived the attack and could not believe what they had seen. One ship, one crew, one human leading the way, and they had won. On a dozen worlds that had accepted hegemony rule without question, people started asking questions. If humans could challenge the Empire and survive, what else might be possible? If one small crew could bring down half of Black Spire Station, what could an organized rebellion accomplish? The hegemony had built its power on the belief that resistance was impossible. But James Park had proven that belief wrong. He had shown the galaxy that empires were not invincible. They could be hurt. They could be beaten. They could be made to bleed. Rebellions sparked on outer rim worlds. Freedom movements gained new members. Species that had never considered fighting back began to talk about revolution. The galaxy was waking up. And it was humans who had lit the fire. David Kim returned to flying, carrying cargo across the stars like he always had. But now when he walked into a cantina, people recognized him. They bought him drinks and asked him to tell the story one more time. They wanted to hear about the human who had defied an empire. He always told them about James. He always told them about Grace. He made sure the galaxy knew their names. Princess Hana grew up in hiding, protected by her mother and a network of loyal supporters. But she never forgot the man who had saved her. She kept a picture of James Park beside her bed. And every night she would look at it and remember. When she was old enough, she made a promise. I will build a galaxy worthy of his sacrifice, she said to her mother. I will create a universe where no child has to be afraid, where no empire can take whatever it wants without consequence. I will make sure that what he did means something. Queen Yuna smiled sadly. That is a heavy burden for one so young. I am not carrying it alone, Hana replied. I have his example to guide me, and I have the memory of everyone who helped bring me home. Years passed. The rebellion grew. The hegemony weakened. And in cantinas and spaceports across 1,000 worlds, people still raised their glasses to a name that had become a symbol of defiance. James Park, the human who reminded the galaxy that empires could fall. The human who proved that sometimes all it took was one person brave enough to try. And somewhere out in the stars, in a quiet corner of the universe that no map could find, David Kim flew his old ship through the endless night. He was alone now, but not really. He carried his friend's memory with him, a light in the darkness that would never go out. "We did it, James," he whispered to the stars. "We really did it." The Defiant's engines hummed, and the ship flew on toward whatever adventure waited next. The story was over, but the legend was just beginning. The cantina on Orbital Station 12 smelled like cheap alcohol and broken dreams. James Park sat alone in the corner, his back against the wall, watching the door like he always did. Old habits from his Marine days never really died. They just waited in the shadows of his mind, ready to wake up when trouble walked through the door. And trouble was definitely walking through the door tonight. She wore a dark hood that covered most of her face, but James could see the way she moved. This was not some drunk spacer looking for a fight. This was someone important trying very hard not to look important. She scanned the room once, twice, and then her eyes found him. James took another sip of his drink and waited. The woman crossed the crowded cantina without making a sound. She sat down across from him and pushed back her hood. James felt his heart stop for just a moment. He knew that face. Everyone in the galaxy knew that face. Queen Yuna of the Volantis Star Dominion looked older than her pictures. 3 years of running and hiding had carved lines into her face that did not belong there. But her eyes still burned with the fire of a ruler who had lost everything except her will to fight. "James Park," she said. Her voice was soft but strong. Former United States Marine Corps. Former cargo pilot for the Henderson Mining Company. Current freelance transporter of goods that most people do not want to talk about. James set down his glass. "You forgot the part where I mind my own business and stay away from political problems. I am not here to discuss politics." Queen Yuna leaned forward. "I am here because my daughter is being held prisoner by the Galactic Hegemony, and you are the only person in this galaxy crazy enough to help me get her back." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, I think you have the wrong guy. I move cargo from point A to point B. I do not start wars with empires. They have my daughter in Blackspire Station." The Queen's voice cracked just a little on the word daughter. "She is 8 years old. She has been their prisoner for 3 years. 3 years of tests, of experiments, of crying herself to sleep in a cold cell while waiting for someone to save her." James closed his eyes. He did not want to hear this. He did not want to feel the familiar pull of duty and guilt that had driven him his whole life. He was done being a hero. The last time he had tried to be a hero, good people had died. "I cannot help you," he said. "Find someone else?" Queen Yuna reached into her cloak and placed a small data chip on the table. "This contains the coordinates to a hidden treasury vault. Inside that vault is enough money to buy a small planet. It is everything my family saved over 200 years. It is yours if you bring my daughter home." James stared at the chip. That kind of money could change everything. He could disappear to some quiet corner of the galaxy where no one would ever find him. He could finally stop running from his past, but he shook his head. Money is not the problem. The problem is that Blackspire Station is the most secure prison in the galaxy. It orbits a dying star that throws out enough radiation to cook a ship in minutes. It has 3 capital ships guarding it and 10,000 soldiers inside. No one has ever escaped from Blackspire. No one has ever even tried to break in. "I know," the Queen said. "That is why I need a human." James looked at her carefully. "What is that supposed to mean?" Queen Yuna smiled for the first time. It was a sad smile, full of pain and desperate hope. "I have studied your species, James Park. Humans are not the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. But you have something that no other species in this galaxy possesses. You do not know when to quit. You look at impossible odds, and you say, "Let me try anyway." You have fought wars against enemies 10 times your size and won. You have survived plagues and famines and disasters that would have destroyed any other civilization. You are, quite simply, too stubborn to die. James said nothing. He had heard speeches like this before. They usually came right before someone asked him to do something suicidal. "I know about Vega 7, the Queen continued, and James felt his blood turn cold. "I know about the colony evacuation. I know you tried to save those people and failed. I know you carry their names in your heart like stones around your neck." "Stop," James whispered. "I know you blame yourself for every single death, even though there was nothing you could have done. The hegemony attacked without warning. You had no time, but you still tried. You flew into a bombardment zone to rescue civilians while everyone else ran away. I said stop." Queen Yuna reached across the table and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "My daughter is alone in the dark, James. She is a little girl who does not understand why her mother cannot come save her. Every night, she prays for a hero. Every morning, she wakes up disappointed." James pulled his hand away. His chest hurt. His eyes burned. He had spent 3 years trying to bury the ghosts of Vega 7, and this woman had dug them all up in 5 minutes. "Even if I wanted to help," he said, "I could not do it alone. You have a partner, David Kim. He is the best mechanic in this sector, and he has followed you through worse situations than this." James thought about David, his best friend, his co-pilot, the man who had pulled him out of the wreckage on Vega 7 and refused to let him give up. David would think he had lost his mind if he agreed to this mission, but David would also help him anyway, because that was what friends did. "This is suicide," James said finally. "You know that, right? The chances of success are almost zero." Queen Yuna stood up. She left the data chip on the table. "Almost zero is not zero. That is enough for me." She pulled her hood back over her face. "I will be waiting at these coordinates for 30 days. After that, I will have to find another way. But I hope you will come, James Park. My daughter needs a hero. And I believe you still want to be one." She disappeared into the crowd, leaving James alone with his drink and his demons and a choice that would change everything. He sat there for a long time, staring at the data chip. Then he picked it up, put it in his pocket, and walked out of the cantina to find David Kim.